Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 91. We're getting so close to episode 100. I'm going to have to do like some sort of giveaway or a big something when I reach episode 100, but I'm super excited you guys are here tonight. I am joined with Kayla Becker, and tonight we're going to be talking about emotional well-being. And I have titled this Success Coach's Secrets to Emotional Well-Being, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about, so you can turn around and implement some of the things that Kayla brings to you and feel a sense of emotional well-being for yourself. So Kayla, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Casey, for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we talked a little bit before the show, but for the sake of our audience, would you share a little bit about who you are, where you are, and a little about your aspirations?
Awesome. Yes. So as Casey said, my name is Kayla Becker, and I am currently located in Iowa, so about 5 hours west of Chicago. And prior to my current role as a success coach, is how I name myself, I was an instructional coach and a middle school and high school language arts teacher for 13 years. I spent a year abroad teaching ESL in South Korea before moving back to the States. My family's in Iowa, so that's how I landed here again. And most of my educational time was spent working with an instructional strategist. So I had a lot of students with special needs, IEPs, BIPs within my classroom, 504s. And that's typically what my classroom looked like throughout those 13 years I was in education. And then at a certain point, I decided that I loved teaching, but I wanted to teach something a little bit different. And that's how I branched away from the traditional K-12 classroom. And I started working with individuals and helping them find their own success in life. And a lot of people think that that can be about worldly success, or they want to reach these different aspirations in life. And yes, while there is a component to it, I'm really focused on helping people better understand themselves and who they are, and making sure that their lives are in alignment with what they're doing in their life, so that they find their own better success internally. And then that just bleeds out to everything that they do. So that's really my aspiration in life, is to help people create a better sense of joy and fulfillment within themselves, so that they can lead even better lives for themselves, their families, their communities, and all the individuals that they serve.
Yeah, I love that so much. And we had such great conversation before. I should have been recording everything that we talked about before, but I'm sure it's going to come out in live when we're talking too. But tell a little bit. I want to hear. I have an interesting question that really is not at all what I'd planned to talk about, but I am just so curious. You talked about being an instructional coach at one point, and I know that there are a lot of instructional coaches who listen to this podcast. I would love to hear how you feel like what you do now connects to the work that you did as an instructional coach. Like, do you see some similarities and connections there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I've never been asked that before, so thanks for asking it. The commonality with both of them is that you're coaching and leading other adults, right? Like when I think about my time within the classroom, middle school, high school students, yes, when I was an ESL teacher, I did have some adults that I worked with. But working with children and working with adults is very different. And if you're an instructional coach, you will understand this wholeheartedly. And I think that to me was one of the hardest transitions when I moved from my traditional classroom into an instructional coaching role was I was not prepped for mentally the difference between leading children, students, and leading my colleagues who are also somewhat students, learning new concepts, learning new tools, learning new curriculums. And that was really difficult because in both of the in schools districts that I served in, I was transitioning within the school itself. So they knew me as a teacher, as a colleague, and then I had this position of authority, people would assume, placed
Mhm.
upon me when I took this different role. So that changes the dynamics as well when you're working with adults. I was young in my career as well. So I think that also played a role into it. Just because of the tenure that some of them had and the changes in education that some of them had based off of what I had seen and experienced. So there's multiple layers to what that's like, but I think the main similarity is working with adults is different than working with children
Mm.
and different mindset, different beliefs. It's also very true that children are easier to mold and shape in some regard simply because they're younger and they've had less practices, experiences, reps, if you want to use a sports analogy, of knowing one thing. So it's easier to sometimes tweak some of those perceptions, beliefs, work, right? Their knowledge base. And adults, we just have practiced things longer. That's just how it is. So it takes more repetitions. And in order to change some of that or help people understand things. And I think that's another really important point that isn't always stated, at least with the individuals that I was working with, to help me understand that before I took the role. There's just some small nuances, and teaching in the classroom is different from teaching your colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about that quite a bit. Like, I'm part of the New to Coaching Facebook group that's founded by Allison Peterson. One of the things we talk about so often is how typically what happens for an instructional coach, like they are hired because of their mastery level as a classroom teacher, but then they're thrown into this role with very little training or understanding about adult learning and mindset and self and social awareness. And it truly starts to impact their own emotional well being because they're having to manage and deal with all of these things that they've never dealt with before. So I think that leads perfectly into tonight's bigger topic, is that emotional well-being. Why do you feel like it is the foundation for both personal and professional success, especially for educators?
One thing that I am very aware of and was very aware of when I was in the classroom was educators care so much, and they really want to see the kids succeed, and they really want to help children be successful in their academic pursuits and just in general as people. And I think because we as educators care so much, I think when we see students struggle, and I could just be speaking for myself, but when we see students struggle, when things are difficult or hard, we take a lot of that upon ourselves.
Mhm.
And we think, potentially we're doing something wrong, we're just not explaining it the right way, and we can become really hard on ourselves when we see students struggle because we care so much. Like, why else would educators spend their breaks, their Christmases, their summer vacations working on these lesson plans if they didn't care? And because they are so wrapped up and it's so much of who they are, I think that is something that plays a really strong role in educators' emotional well-being, is because they are so emotionally tied to the success of their students and they care so deeply and they refer to them as their second children, right? Or even as their children.
Yeah.
And because of that, it has such a big impact on their emotional well-being. That's what I've seen from my own experience.
Yeah, definitely cut out there for a second. Sorry. I don't know. My internet's just not quite there. Hold on. We're going to get back. Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I just cut out for a second. So sorry, guys. It's a blip. I think what happened, we moved our tower. You know, we've got one of those towers That's like you can move it to extend the anyway. My son moved it so he could have closer access to the internet. So yeah, that's what's happening there. Okay, so you were talking about teachers and really their identity being so closely tied to their student success, right?
Exactly.
Okay, continue there.
And that is the reason why I think that emotional well-being is so important for educators, is because their sense of self. And I think a lot of teachers, we wrap our identity up into how well students are performing in the classroom, if they're understanding, and we take that upon ourselves as something that we could be doing something wrong if our students aren't succeeding to the same level
Yeah.
as other students are. And I think that for me is really what encompassed a lot of the emotional like struggles that I would have at times, because I cared so deeply and I knew that the teachers around me also cared so deeply about their students, that then we take that pain or we take that anguish or we take those feelings that we're having home with us, and then we see how that impacts our family life or our life outside of school, that we're maybe a little bit shorter tempered or we have big emotions and big feelings when we get home. And that's how you can see how it starts to impact other areas of our life, because we care so much, because we wear our heart on our sleeve. And is there anything wrong with it? No. But what I learned throughout my teaching career was I needed to find a better way to manage that, because it was impacting me outside of school. And that's why it really became such a passion for me. Not only did I see like my students needed some of that guidance themselves, because I knew if they weren't emotionally well and didn't have all their emotional needs met, they couldn't hear me always. They couldn't, like, they were there, they wanted to learn, but they weren't in the right place in order to do that successfully. So
Yeah.
when I learned that about my students and I saw that in myself, that's why it became such a big passion of mine to improve my own so that it could also be a benefit to others.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Like, I don't know that we are great as adults at recognizing when we're not in a place of like a positive place, like it's hard to recognize when you're not taking care of your emotional well-being, right? Could you speak more to that? Like how do we know that we could be in a better place and when we're not?
Yes, that's a great question, because one of the things that I recognize about myself when I was like, I want to improve my emotional well-being, I want to better understand what's happening internally to myself so I can also better understand what's happening to my students, was I do a lot of reflection. I like doing a lot of journaling. And what I started to realize as I was journaling and writing and listening to different things was I, as a child, I personally didn't have much vocabulary to express my emotions. And maybe you relate and the audience relates as well. Some of our households didn't have a strong vocabulary to express and share. So it's not something that we learned as a child, and now it's something that we're learning as an adult. So it's a little clunky, it's a little confusing, it may not come off the tongue as well. I grew up in a great family, very loving parents, all the things. But my parents also didn't have a lot of vocabulary for it. It was you're either happy, you're sad, you're tired, or do you want something to eat, right? And being tired and needing something to eat have nothing to do with your emotional state, but that's typically how things were communicated. And because that's how things were communicated, I didn't have a vocabulary. Like, I didn't know how to talk about my own emotions, nor did I know how to recognize when my emotions weren't in my greatest interest or when I was in a negative mindset, because I didn't have any experience. And here I was, an adult, teaching myself. And that's really what I think some of the adults and many of the adults that I work with is like, they didn't have a vocabulary to talk about it. So it's uncomfortable, it's clunky, it doesn't feel normal. They don't even know how to verbalize it. So if you don't know how to verbalize it, you're not aware of it, what can you do with it then? So what I started to do, and anyone can do this at home, is I learned about something called an emotion wheel. And this could be very familiar to a lot of teachers. And you use an emotion wheel, and you start typically in the center and you work your way out to identify the emotion that you're feeling. And what I would train myself to do was every day I would come home from school and I'd let my dog out. And the first thing that I would do is I would grab my emotion wheel and I would look at that emotion wheel. And I would go through and say all the ways that I was currently feeling to help me start to practice how to vocalize it. And a lot of people will say like, I feel this way, or I am angry, or I am sad, or they start to correlate themselves with that emotion, right? And if you know anything about English, it's a predicate adjective that means I equal this emotion, which is not true. Instead, you're currently feeling a certain way. So if you decide to pick up an emotion wheel, Google it, you can find one that you like. The sentence frame that I would always use and that I would encourage others to use is, currently I feel blank, put in the emotion because, and then I would tell myself why. So it was important for me to understand that it's currently, right? It's how I currently feel. And like a current of water, our emotions are going to change. And 5 minutes from now, I could be laughing at something that my dog is doing, or I could feel a different way. So it's a current. It's how I currently feel. It's how I feel. It's not how I am. I would state the emotion and then why I'm feeling that way. And for me, using that vocabulary and telling myself that helped me really, I would feel a great sense of relief because I was like, oh, that's why I'm feeling that way. Oh, I understand now. Because when I was in the busy hustle bustle of students in and out of my classroom, every 40 minutes or every 90 minutes, I didn't have a lot of time to process. So I needed to process when I came home. So that was the tool that I used that was really impactful, in order to help me start to build my vocabulary around my emotions and how I was feeling, and to start to change that trajectory so I could do something different with it. But if I wasn't aware, how can I do anything with it? So that was my first tool that I used to really build my awareness. Free, easy, just takes a couple of minutes to explain that to yourself. Did that answer the question, or am I missing a part of it?
Are you there?
I am.
Okay. Well, I would love for you to repeat how you use the emotion wheel, because I think it just completely cut out.
Perfect. So the emotion wheel, you're going to Google emotion wheel, and you're going to find many different items, and lots of different pictures, lots of different ones that could potentially work for you. You're going to pick one that you like, and you're going to follow an emotion wheel. You typically start in the center and then you work your way out to find the most descriptive emotion that describes how you're currently feeling. And a lot of people will use the vocabulary of I am blank, right? I am angry. I am sad. I am frustrated. I am fill in the blank. And I became really aware. I was an English teacher, so I know that am is a predicate adjective. And if I say I am angry, then I'm saying I equal angry or I equal sad. And that's not what I am, right? Like I'm more than that. I have more depth to my being. So the sentence frame that I would encourage others to use is the one that I use, which is, currently I feel emotion because, and then tell yourself why. And that's important because emotions are like currents. And you think about a current water, right? It's moving, it's changing, it's going to be in a different spot 30 seconds from now, 5 minutes from now than what it is right now. And my emotions, your emotions, our emotions are the exact same way. Our emotions are going to change. They're going to grow, develop. My dog could do something silly and that could make me laugh, right? So my emotions are changing. So find however you're feeling on the emotion wheel and then just say, currently, I feel, state the emotion because, and then tell yourself why you're feeling that way. And that's important because it allows us to practice verbalizing how we're feeling. And I would always feel this really great sense of relief after I would talk through how I was feeling and get it out. A lot of people think that they can mentally process their emotions, but emotions aren't meant to be processed internally. But vocalizing them either just to an empty room or writing it down can be really helpful to help us process how we're feeling and work that out. So that is my suggestion, is to use an emotion wheel. That's how I built up my ability to better understand my own emotions and how I was feeling a certain way.
Yeah. So I was actually going to be talking about what Laura just said. I think you're exactly right about not having the vocabulary to express our feelings. Oh, hi.
You're back.
Hey, I don't even know what is going on. Like it's showing that I have full service, but it's just madness tonight. So it's crazy town USA. Here's what Laura said. I think you were exactly right about not having the vocabulary to express our feelings when we are children. Even adults need tools such as the emotion wheel to identify what is being felt. Absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to say, Laura, was, I think we have this assumption that because we're adults and we're working with adults, they inherently have these skills. And we do not. I wish so badly. I know we focus so much now on social emotional learning, but I wish that we spent more time in classrooms helping students to have these skills and have the language. And it's so fascinating how it's also generational. Like you were talking about, Kayla, how your parents didn't have that language because they didn't grow up understanding or using that language. So they used what language they knew they could with you. They
Mhm.
used only what they knew with you. And so the cycle continues. Yeah.
Mhm.
So interesting.
Yeah, and it's so
Okay.
important because
So,
it's, like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
nope, you go ahead.
I was
You go
just going to
ahead.
say, like, no one's at fault. I mean, that's the important thing that I want to share is like, no one's at fault. Our parents for not teaching it to us or for us not knowing, like, we're not at fault because we don't even know. But once you know, that's when I believe that we have a responsibility to choose to do something and to learn so that we can vocalize it and so that we can communicate better and that we can express ourselves better. Because when we have the ability to vocalize it, there's a sense of peace that comes over us because we're able to understand internally how we're feeling. Otherwise, it's chaotic inside of us and we feel
Mhm.
this frustration or anger. And typically, it's not comfortable emotions, right? That's why we're feeling it and we feel uncomfortable. And that's why it's coming out. So we feel better internally. Our internal landscape, as some people talk about, feels better when we better understand those emotions and we can
Yeah.
share it with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us. So you've talked about this strategy. How do you see that? Because one of the questions I was going to ask about, like those high stress seasons, and of course, I think we are in a high stress October. It's known as Shocktober, right? But even in a high stress situation or season, how can teachers and leaders use like the strategy that you just talked about or other strategies to really recognize their emotional well-being?
First, that I would say that we all have to have a desire to do it, right? Because if you're being told to do something, we're always going to be hesitant and much less likely to do it. So, first, it would be that awareness of, I could feel a little bit better if I did some of these things, right? Like, I'd be curious, and I think curiosity is an important point in testing, and I say testing some of these things out because the emotion wheel could not work for some people, right? It just doesn't resonate with them, and something else would be more appropriate. But it's important to have this aspect of curiosity, just like we ask our students to do, and testing, trying different things out to see what works for us. And sometimes that means, using the emotion wheel. Sometimes it means finding other practices and habits and rituals that allow us to down regulate and come in with a better state of mind and being. I talk about this often when I do presentations. I'm a yoga instructor as well, and I know how important it is to breathe. I always do breathing at the beginning of my classes and at my end of my classes. And it's something that we tend to forget to do when we're upset. We tend to hold our breath and we get really tight and constricted. And then things don't tend to go very well because we're not feeling the greatest inside. So, one thing that I started to do with my students, because I had this very strong understanding that in order that the students didn't know some of these skills as well at home, so I can model them to the students.
Mhm.
So if you're a teacher, if you're an instructional strategist, if you're an instructional coach, a leader, whatever it is, and the emotion wheel doesn't fit for you, another thing that you could do is just find some time to do some breathing. Box breathing, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold the exhale out for 4, or just take 5 deep breaths, slow, deep breaths. And just allow that to really calm yourself down and get more into your body and understand how you're feeling. and put some space, right, between maybe your emotional state or your reaction that you want to have and when you're choosing to then respond, as opposed to having that knee-jerk reaction. And if you can pause, even if you can just pause and just take one breath, you're in a better state because you've recognized it and there's been that moment of decision, deliberation. Oh, should I do this? Is this my best, like next course of action or not? So I think that's an important way that individuals can do it. I mean, I would even tell my students, hey, Miss Becker needs just a moment to take a couple of deep breaths because I'm feeling like uncomfortable or I'm feeling stressed right now. And I want to have a really good conversation with you, but I need just 5 breaths and then I'll be right there for you. Was that okay? Right. And I would just say that to the students and they'd always be like, okay, cool. Like didn't bother them at all. But then I had a moment just to take a couple of deep breaths and then I could approach the conversation so much better. Whether you're a principal talking with a teacher or a student or a parent, like just enacting that can be very powerful to show up as a better version of yourself.
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of journaling. And I think that that can be really great if people want to express that way. If you like doing art, that's a great way to draw your emotions. Taking a quick walk down the hallway or going to the bathroom if you have somebody that can cover your class. Lots of different ways to move our body or just to move the emotion out because emotion means energy in motion and it's not supposed to be trapped within our body. We have to move, whether it's vocalizing it out, writing, breathing, some way that has to get up and out of us rather than holding it in and constricting it.
Yeah. I love so much about what you're saying. It's so, so, so powerful, so needed for so many people, for all of us really. But I really love how one of the things that you talked about was number one, the modeling of this to students. But I think as a leader, you're also modeling it to your people. And if you are able to take that pause and you let people know, I'm just going to take a pause real quick so I can gather my mental state, gather my emotions, really think about next steps. Wow, that speaks volumes about who you are as a leader and how you want to lead your people and that you care about them so much that you're willing to just take a pause. The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is I think obviously, we enact what has been modeled for us. And so when we do start to feel certain emotions, and sometimes anger or frustration comes to mind for me, but we have been modeled to go and vent to someone else. Now, I'm not saying we don't need someone to vent to, but just using some of the strategies that you've talked about before we take that next step, I think could keep us from venting so much because what I find sometimes is when we're venting, it's a way for us to hold on to emotions instead of releasing them and really thinking, what are my next steps from here to break free of this? Not all the time, but I definitely do see where that can happen.
Well, and I would agree because I think sometimes, at least from my personal experience, sometimes when we go to share something, that also gets magnified by the other individual. They're feeling a certain way, right? So it's kind of like we're just adding more on top of it. And sometimes when that happens, right, like I truly believe that when we're sharing that information, our intent is, to feel better and we want to be heard and we want to be understood and we want somebody to acknowledge us and we don't want to take it home to our family and to maybe a spouse or significant other that doesn't have the same understanding of what it's like in a school environment. So we're sharing it with someone, venting, as you can say, but then it tends to get magnified sometimes. And then we sometimes feel worse, right? And we get kind of built up with it. The other point I want to make is, about that modeling of the breathing is one thing that I know is if I would have a student come to me and they were really upset, and you know how that it can be with students, they're just like, things are coming out of their mouth and it doesn't make sense. And, you just kind of, hey, take a breath, take a couple of breaths, catch your breath. I'll be here and just tell me what happened when you've caught your breath. And it's like, we can do the same thing. We tell students it all the time, just catch your breath, take a couple deep breaths, and then explain to me what happened.
Yeah.
And even though we may not be out of breath and upset like that, It's just using that same tool back to ourselves and taking a couple of those smooth, slow, deep breaths before we get to that frustrated, upset state.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. So I'm going to pop up a couple of comments. So Diana, hi Diana. She said she meets her students at the door to gauge their emotional well-being, have emojis on the wall as they enter the room, gives her a pulse of where they are when they enter and leave. Absolutely.
Right.
So powerful. And then she said another strategy is a picture of the day, like a calming picture to get started, which I think is helpful not just for students, but for yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what, when we're asking or when we're gauging students' emotional states, isn't it also true that we're thinking about, okay, what is interaction going to be with them as the day goes on? So then we really have to decide, like, how am I showing up for the student? Am I emotionally ready to show up for the student?
And I think that's why it can be really powerful
Can
to
you
put a
guys hear
practice.
me? I don't know. I'm so
Yes,
sorry. This internet. One day to invent. I'm just talking. I'm just like randomly talking as this goes on,
I can hear you.
waving my hands like I'm saying something. Oh, you can?
I can hear
Okay.
you
Well,
now.
people
Yes.
just heard all kinds of random things, randomness. My emotional well-being is not quite where it needs to be because I really want my internet to stop cutting out. That would be great. So let me tell you how I'm feeling, Kayla.
All right, I'm
Kayla,
ready.
I'm, I'm feeling frustrated that my internet's not working. And I'm also feeling a little bit embarrassed because you have come on the show to share such great things and it's just also fantastic. So sorry about this.
I have faith that the message will get across and people will hear what they're supposed to hear.
That's right. That's right. Amen, sister. Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, but I want to know if someone is feeling overwhelmed, like right now. Shocktober is what people have named it, right? What do you feel like is one small but impactful action they can take today to prioritize emotional well-being?
I think the first is to understand that our emotions are information and they're not good or bad, right? A lot of times we want to place it in one camp or the other. And instead, I want people to view our emotions as information. And if we're feeling a certain way that's less than stellar or uncomfortable, it's giving us information. And if we're feeling in a way that's feeling great or happy or very comfortable, it's also giving us information. So if we can use it as information to guide us to do more of something or less of something, or to interact with something in a different light, or come prepared in a different way, or to interact with someone differently, I think that can be a very powerful tool as opposed to demonizing them or thinking that there's anything wrong with us for feeling a certain way. So emotions are just information. And then I would say that the most impactful thing that a person can do right now, if you're feeling a certain way, is to find something that resonates with you to help you release your emotions. You
Mm-hmm.
could have 50 tools, but if you don't use any of them, it doesn't matter, right? So find something that you enjoy, whether it's doing something on your way to work in the morning to settle yourself. Maybe it's music, maybe it's saying some mantras to yourself. Maybe it's listening to a pump up song or a favorite podcast or a book, like something to get you into a good state of mind. I would do the same thing during my lunch break and just get myself back into a better state of mind if I somehow lost it in the morning. And I think that that's the most powerful tool that we can do, is to find something that resonates with us, and then to know that it could be similar or different for the students or the other people in our life, but to help other people find something that would bring them into a better state, so that they can find that better alignment and that they can be their best version of themselves more consistently.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So many good takeaways from tonight. I think your last point is probably the most powerful. Like, if you're not utilizing the like any one of these things well, or you're just trying to jump from one to the next because one's not working, then you got to pause and really think about like what is the purpose of this, and why am I taking a moment to pause and utilize this practice. And I also would say to practice the thing that you choose. It will not become a habit for you until it is practiced, and you also won't see the benefits of it until it is practiced.
Exactly. And that's why we approach it with curiosity and we're experimenting and testing things out, because it takes away some of the sense of like overwhelm, and it just becomes, let's see what happens. Let's see if it helps. Let's see how I feel. And that's a different energy than like, I have to do this every single day and I have to look this way, or I need to do these 10 things. And then it becomes work and hard, and, it pulls us down.
Yes, for sure. I love that. Okay. So, Kayla, let's say that someone really wanted to master the art of emotional well-being and they wanted to work with you as a success coach. How can they find you?
Awesome. So you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, Kayla Becker. And send me a message. I'd be happy to connect with you there. I also have a free Facebook group where I'll do weekly trainings on different topics that could be helpful and impactful to help you stay consistent on your journey if you like that type of format as well. But if you're interested, just send me a message on Facebook or LinkedIn and I'll get back to you right away.
Yeah, I love it. And just know, guys, that as always, everything that she just mentioned is going to be in the show notes, so you have access to it. And remember that show notes pop up on YouTube and LinkedIn later. And then if you catch the replay on the podcast, the show notes will automatically be there. Be sure that you share this show with someone, and definitely share the things that Kayla has suggested, not only the strategies that she suggested, but that Facebook group. My gosh, I'm not a part of it, but you better believe that after the show, I'm going to go and join. Is it a free Facebook group, or is it?
Yep,
Okay.
it's a free Facebook group.
That's awesome. So fantastic. Okay. Well, we're going to be sure to catch you guys there, and I'm going to be sure to share that with all the people I know, because that's awesome. Okay, Kayla, thank you so much for being here tonight. This was wonderful.
You're welcome, Casey. Thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, man, I'm so sorry that all of the technology issues hit us, and then the technology issues hit us again. All right, guys, this has been a great night, regardless of technology issues. I love you all. Thank you for being here. I'll catch you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey there. Thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends, and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with Casey on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.